I believe that Jodi Hildebrandt is a pathological alienator. She is dangerous and she is destructive. And the more that I watch her videos and research who she is and the damage she's done, the more familiar she seems to me. Which makes sense because one of my own parents is a severe pathological alienator. Before I get into the case, I want to talk a little bit about what is alienation. We usually hear about alienation through parental alienation. Parental alienation is a type of child abuse where an angry parent brainwashes, manipulates their child to turn on their other loving, healthy-minded parent without justification. But alienation is not limited to just parents and their children. Alienation, in fact, can occur between any individuals, such as in this case, when an outsider comes between two people who are in a marriage. The outsider manipulates one partner to turn on their other loving partner, causing spousal alienation. Alienation, I believe, is the missing piece in this criminal case involving Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt. In fact, I believe that not only did Jodi Hildebrandt alienate Kevin and Ruby Franke from each other, I believe that Jodi successfully convinced Ruby to alienate Kevin from his children as well. Now, I've been following this case closely since it happened 3 hours from me where I live in Utah. And since Wednesday, August 30th, when the 12-year-old boy of the Franke household escaped to his neighbor's house to ask for food and water, with duct tape on his wrists and ankles, open wounds, and clear signs of malnourishment. In fact, he was described as emaciated. I've been interested in a few elements in this case: the influence of Mormonism, the exploitation of children online, but most importantly, what I suspect to be the true psychopathology behind Jodi Hildebrandt in particular, which gives a little insight into why this happened in the first place. My goal is that by the end of this video, you will understand the psychopathology of severe alienators, and you will see how it relates to Jodi Hildebrandt. Who is Ruby Franke? Ruby Franke is a devout Mormon mom and she has 6 children. She is a successful YouTuber whose channel, 8 Passengers, boasted over 2 million subscribers in its heyday. Together with her husband, Kevin Franke, Ruby amassed millions of dollars and followers on YouTube. Their videos have been controversial because they fall under the category of family content. Essentially what this means is that the Franke children have been unpaid actors and actresses for most of their lives. They've been forced to live their lives with a video camera in their faces. Everything has been filmed. I have seen some of their footage from their channel and it's hard for me to watch. I'll show some clips here so you get a gist of why people have been concerned.
You're gonna lose the privilege to eat dinner.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago. I'm sleeping on a beanbag since October.
If you cut one more thing in my house, I'm going to take the scissors, look at me, and I'm gonna cut its head off.
Grandma, I'm gonna be so mad.
I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. Hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
You don't need food.
Do you know what mating is?
No.
Do you want to learn?
Julie hasn't had a talk yet.
Do you want me to tell you?
No.
You sure?
Yeah. Julie, do you want to talk?
I hesitate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm like a mean barbarian, but I told the kids, I said, I'm not even going to let you eat breakfast until you get your chores done.
Well, viewers on YouTube became so concerned for the Franke children that someone actually started a petition on change.org, which garnered almost 18,000 signatures. Moreover, the oldest daughter, Sherry Franke, has since come forward stating that she called CPS to make sure that her younger siblings were safe. Sources have confirmed that CPS did visit the Franke house one time last year. But now, after the horror that unfolded on August 30th of this year, almost everyone is asking the same question. How could it be that these children were so blatantly failed? not only by CPS, but also by their extended family members too. Ruby Frankie has 4 sisters and a brother, and 2 parents, all of whom have YouTube channels as well, and very successful ones at that. They have all made millions of dollars on YouTube, this entire family. While they could have used their platform to try to speak out to get help for these kids, all 4 of the sisters said the same thing. For the last 3 years, we have kept quiet on the subject of our sister, Ruby Frankie. For the sake of her children. They kept quiet for the sake of her children. Make it make sense. They also said, we wouldn't feel right about moving forward with regular content without addressing the most recent events. Ruby was arrested, which needed to happen. Jodie was arrested, which needed to happen. The kids are safe, which is the #1 priority. People have known that these children have been in harm, and yet they continued to be abused. Understandably, people are wondering about Kevin. People have been asking, where is the father? What about Kevin Frankie? And that's where my mind went at first too. I thought, like, how could he have not known? Wouldn't he have been able to see that the children were starving and malnourished? And then I began to wonder, well, was Kevin even seeing his children? I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he hasn't been in contact with his children. And then a little alarm bell goes off in my head because I thought that sounds similar to parental alienation. When one spouse either withholds the children from the other spouse or uses the children, convinces and brainwashes them to reject their father, to hurt the father, and to isolate the children. All these questions had gone unanswered. But 2 days ago, Kevin's lawyer finally spoke out. And what he had to say about both Kevin and Ruby's marriage, as well as his relationship with the children, was nothing short of shocking.
In other words, he was completely taken off guard by these allegations, completely shocked?
Absolutely shocked.
First of all, their current status, were they separated?
Correct.
They were separated, I read, for 13 months, so they weren't living with each other. How much was he seeing the kids?
Almost not at all. Actually, not at all.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because she told him it was better, that they needed to work on their marriage and needed to keep their family together, but that everything was better off with him not in the home and not communicating with the children.
Was he calling the kids? Because I think what a lot of people are looking at this and they're wondering, well, what did he know? So he might have been living separately from her for 13 months, but he wasn't calling the kids, checking in on the kids, seeing how they're doing? He's the father.
I totally understand that. That was the big question on my mind and the big question on a lot of people. If you read everything that's in the media, he's getting raked over the coals for that. But what people don't understand is that he was trying to preserve his marriage. He was taking direction from her. She's the one who asked him to leave the house and indicating that in order for him to be able to get back together with her, she was requesting that he leave the home and that he not contact them or the children. Later told him that everything was blissful at home. It was so much better without it. Emotionally, she was controlling him because she knew how much he valued their marriage and valued their family, and it was his desire to be able to get back with the family and preserve his marriage. The last conversation they had was last Friday. And that's when, during that conversation, is when he came to his senses about how he'd been manipulated and deceived.
Are you saying he confronted her about these allegations?
To some degree. I don't know the entire contents of the conversation, but his discussion with me was that during that conversation, things were said that made him realize how he'd been deceived and misled. And as I told you earlier, he didn't even know the kids were in Ivans.
After I heard what Kevin's lawyer had to say, I became more and more certain that this is a case of parental alienation, allegedly. Although people have speculated in the past year or so that the Frankies' marriage could be on the rocks, I think most people have been really surprised to hear that Kevin Frankie hasn't seen his own children in over a year. To be honest, when I heard that Kevin Frankie hadn't seen his kids in over a year, my first thought as a parent was, okay, and it's hard for me to conceive of how you would place the potential of saving your marriage over time and relationship with your children. My initial reaction was that it's incomprehensible to me how a parent could disappear from their children's lives for 13 months based on the premise that he could potentially lose his marriage otherwise. Here's where I come in with but. As a survivor of 20 years of alienation myself, I can start to understand, if I put myself in Kevin's shoes, how this might have happened. Bear with me. If Ruby had been waging psychological warfare on her husband for years, possibly longer, and then along came Jodie a severe alienator, I believe. It is possible that together, Ruby and Jodie essentially broke Kevin down to the point where he became a shell of himself, just trying to survive, a state that most survivors of abuse can probably relate to. If Kevin was truly being intensely psychologically brainwashed, I can begin to believe how he might be telling the truth, especially when you remember that the Frankies are devout members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church. In fact, Kevin himself even taught at BYU, which is the LDS college out here in Utah. I just moved here at the beginning of this year, and living in Utah myself, I've become familiar with some of the doctrines and principles of the Mormon faith. For members of the LDS religion, nothing is more sacred than family. In fact, for Mormons, their entire purpose on earth is to get into heaven, the celestial kingdom. They're so desperate to get into heaven because they believe that once they're there, they will be united with their family and they can live forever with their family members in heaven. To get divorced is to potentially forsake the miracle of living together forever with your family in heaven. As a devout Mormon, I'm sure that Kevin actually does believe this. So through this lens, I can begin to understand how it's possible, perhaps, that Kevin was willing to forego time with his children in order to save his marriage so that they could all be together in heaven one day. Caveat: he probably did not think it would be 13 months. With this in mind, though, let's not forget that Kevin is not blameless. He participated in exploiting his children on YouTube and endorsing the same severe parenting tactics that Ruby has used. What I believe, as of now, is that it's a both-and situation. Kevin absolutely took part in the exploitation of the children on YouTube. He did not stop Ruby from emotionally abusing them. But as of now, it appears as if he was completely unaware of the physical abuse that occurred at the hands of Ruby and Jodie in the past 13 months. According to Randy Kester, Kevin's lawyer, Kevin Frankie wasn't even aware that his children were living in Ivins, Utah, inside Jodie's $3 million home, which honestly looks way more like a compound than a home. Irvins, Utah, by the way, is about a 4-hour drive from Springville, Utah, which is where the Frankie household is located. Kevin's lawyer said that Frankie had been following every request his wife made, which he now believes came from Jodi Hildebrandt. Before I talk about Jodi Hildebrandt, I want to make one thing really clear. I am in no way downplaying or excusing Ruby Frankie's behavior and actions, especially as the children's biological mother. She has played an enormous role in causing this horrific abuse, and she needs to be locked up for life, in my opinion. But I also think that Jodi Hildebrandt is the true severe alienator here. Her psychopathology, I think, has really been the driving force behind all of this. Who is this woman? Jodi Hildebrandt was born June 1969 into a very conservative LDS household in Salt Lake City, Utah. Her parents are members of the LDS Church, and she has 3 siblings, a sister, and 2 brothers. I couldn't find much about her early life, but she did marry, in 1989, a man named Brenton Pugh. This was a marriage that would last 10 years, but by all accounts, a marriage that was not a happy one. Former clients and students have claimed that not only was Jodie controlling and manipulative towards Brenton, but she also had multiple affairs with both men and women. Upon divorcing, Jodie's ex-husband actually gained full custody of their 2 children. Jodie attended BYU. Ironically enough, she went on to get her master's degree in counseling from the University of Utah in 2003. After that, she began her career as a licensed clinical mental health counselor. She practiced in various settings: private practice, schools, hospitals, and addiction rehabs. Jodie describes herself as your mental fitness and relationship expert. She says, "I have spent over 25 years working with people just like you to help facilitate positive and powerful change." She is the founder and creator of a program called Connections, which is based on her 5 years of experience working at a rehabilitation center for addicts. The core teachings of Connections are that in order to achieve true connection with other human beings, you must not be in distortion. It's important to note that while Jodie is a member of the LDS Church, her teachings are not in line with the LDS Church. She has even claimed that some members, like church officials, bishops, and stake presidents are living in distortion, which is to say they are sinning, I guess. Jodie's teachings have been described as cult-like, radical, and harmful. So Connections really is a destructive program. She founded it in 2012, and it has 3 main principles, which are super ironic given that we now know that she's been charged of 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse. But the principles of Connections, which she claims to endorse and claims to embody herself: honesty, responsibility, and humility. Connections provides a platform with courses, podcasts, books, videos, and even support groups, as well as one-on-one coaching sessions. It's gained popularity and some notoriety throughout the years. Connections has been covered by publications such as the Huffington Post, the Daily Herald, KSL News, and Deseret News. But Jodie Hildebrandt could not keep up a good public image for very long. In 2012, she was placed on probation by the Utah Clinical Mental Health Counseling Board for licensing for about 18 months. This is because she disclosed confidential information from a client to the LDS Church without the client's consent. I also want to stress that without the LDS Church, Jodie Hildebrandt would not have been able to make her millions of dollars. The Mormon bishops and other officials would refer their church members to Jodie Hildebrandt for counseling, particularly men who had struggles with pornography. The LDS Church essentially funneled clients to Jodie's practice. Let's talk about Jodie's partnership with Ruby Franke. Perhaps this horrific tragedy might never have occurred if Ruby Franke and Jodie Hildebrandt hadn't met each other in 2019 when Ruby sought Jodie's counseling services for some marital and family troubles she was experiencing. Unfortunately, the two became quick friends and collaborators, even deciding to launch their own YouTube channel together with a corresponding Facebook group called Connections in 2020. But that wasn't enough apparently, because they even started a podcast called Ask Jodie and Ruby, where they would give advice to listeners, particularly Mormon moms, which is really troublesome to think about. It wasn't long, though, before rumors began to swirl. Some people speculated that their relationship might have been more than just friendship and business. Rumors were fueled when a man named Adam Steed, one of Jodie's alleged victims, came forward with allegations that Jodie had destroyed his marriage. Adam claimed that his ex-wife and Jodie had an inappropriate relationship, and Adam referred to the decision to go to Jodie Hildebrandt for counseling as the single most destructive decision that he has ever made in his life. Here's some footage of Adam Steed talking about his experience with Jodie Hildebrandt.
She did get cited for having a dual relationship with my ex-wife, and she did get cited for sharing my confidential medical records. Over the press, they talk a lot about the medical records. They don't talk about the dual relationship. I don't know if they've all seen that yet.
So we get into this therapy group. Jodie's really charismatic. My wife starts just loving it. I'm excited she's getting help. She said the relationship has to die so it can be reborn. It was like a resurrection thing. And we were the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We worshipped Christ. And so resurrection, I did. Yeah, it has to die to be reborn. And Jodie taught that all these people in support of us, they were all codependent relationships, and it was toxic. And she would just spin it all into this language until she'd have everybody just chopping all the arms of support off in your life till there was no one else to support you except for Jodie Hildebrandt. There were all these boundaries that you had to draw. She coached people to get them so that they wouldn't be near anybody. And very shortly, I learned that if it didn't die on its own, Jodie Hildebrandt would kill the relationship so that it could be reborn. I was in a session with Jodie. I went to Jodie in a private session after having this, and things just started to fall apart really bad right in the last months before my wife left with our baby, 3 weeks after our baby was born. And Jodie was upping the confrontational style and control through my wife over my life. And she was coming home and having these huge arguments with me every time she came back from a session with Jodie. My wife asked me to give our baby a bath. And so I gave her baby a bath. And at this point, my wife would have no physical contact with me, no talking about anything and everything. She totally walks into the bathroom in her lingerie. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, she finally listened to me. We're gonna have our normal life back and stuff. And she started teasing me and acting like she was gonna hop in the tub with me. And I'm holding our baby, our 1-year-old baby. And I just was like, hey, you gotta get the baby out of the tub. And I'm laughing, thinking it was funny. And she leaves with the baby and she comes back into the bathroom and looks at me and just looks at my private parts and then just looks at me in disgust and just turns her back and walks away. And I was just sitting there just like, this is emotional roller coaster feeling. And I just was like really hurt. And I'm sitting in there just like, oh God, this is my life. And I'm just sitting there and she comes back into the bathroom and I didn't want to see her. So I just turned my back to her. Don't even want to look at her. didn't want to fight with her, didn't want to argue, didn't want to use that feeling of feeling so rejected and hurt that way. And so another situation, she came home from...
Can I just state, that's entrapment. To tell you to bathe the child, then to come in with lingerie to arouse you, to then be able to accuse you of child abuse, as then a way to be able to have more power and leverage over you. It sounds like entrapment to me. It sounds like you don't want to say that, but that's what it sounds like to me.
I got a protective order. I went to court. My kids have been kidnapped. And I read in the protective order, and it says that my husband was a victim of sexual abuse, so he doesn't have a healthy understanding of boundaries. And one time he asked me that I had to get the baby out of the tub. And when I came in, he tried hiding an erection.
So she used that against you later?
I read it, and I thought I thought this man would be a terrible person. And then I realized it was me, and my kids were taken away from me.
Yeah.
My baby and my... Sorry. The most important thing in my life was taken away because of that.
Unfortunately, Adam Steed was not the only victim of Jodi Hildebrandt. Another former client has come forward just yesterday, claiming that Jodi has alienated him from his wife and his family too.
There was a man that had successful business that believed that he was a danger to his wife and his family because he did a double take. As a woman, like if he saw a beautiful woman, he would see and he'd look again. This guy got his own apartment and separated from his family because he was a danger.
In some cases, Warner claims husbands were separated from their families for so long, they were considering suicide.
They felt so sick and like such a failure that they felt like they shouldn't be here anymore.
And another came forward just last night. Yet another man who had been alienated from his wife in what was supposed to be marital counseling.
Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke are sitting there filming their videos for their connections company, portraying themselves online as upstanding Mormons and examples to families in the community. Their children are tied up in the basement, and then they're being paid and funded by the church in their billing cycles. I think the end of my marriage all began when our family started associating with Ruby's siblings, and when all of this behind the scenes stuff went on, it really compromised my marriage. And the same pattern that you see playing out in some of these other families happened to me. And I'm not the only one that knew this family and met them and then ended up divorced about a year later under a similar pattern.
Since the 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse have been made, more and more people are coming forward with testimonies of abuse by Jodi Hildebrandt. And a great percentage of these victims are men who Jodi successfully alienated from their wives in what was supposed to be marital counseling. There are also a lot of people making anonymous allegations on Reddit. For example, this person says that Jodi ruined his parents' 50-plus year marriage. She is awful and got my mom thinking strangely. They are both dead now, and I blame Jodi. She's a terrible person in general. Another man spoke out. My wife at the time was referred to Jodi by a friend who was hyper-religious. When Jodi began canceling my wife, that was the beginning of the end for us. My wife became very controlling and took on a victim complex like you would not believe. I was kicked out of the house at the threat of divorce, and I was never so isolated in all of my life. I learned that most of the other guys were in the same situation. Ironic, as the name of the brand is Connections. It was anything but connecting. My ex-wife is a shell of the person she was. Ruled by fear, she continues to cling to control and victim mentality as her safe space, unable to admit fault for anything. It was a tragic ending. He goes on to say, run from Jodi Hildebrandt. She is dangerous. To use Jodi's past behavior as a framework to now understand the current situation, I think gives us a clearer picture of what, in my opinion, might have happened in this case. I see Ruby and Jodi as fire and gasoline, 2 abusers who, when they came together and put their heads together, resulted in amplified destruction. One last survivor of Jodi Hildebrandt that I want to discuss is her niece, Jessie Hildebrandt. I watched her entire interview, and I've got to say it was very troublesome and very disheartening. I feel terrible for her niece, Jessie. Jodi Hildebrandt actually held Jessie in her basement as somewhat of a slave. She kept her isolated from all of society, keeping her locked in the room up to 13 hours a day. I want to include some clips of Jessie's testimony here to give you a sense of the damage that Jodi Hildebrandt is capable of.
It's been a really interesting experience watching everyone focus on Ruby, and I understand why, but this is Jodi. These are Jodi's words. These are Jodi's ideas. These are over decades old. The things that I experienced while living with Jodi, I experienced being tied. I experienced being duct taped. I experienced being blindfolded. I experienced severe isolation. I experienced severe emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse. I experienced the being told I shouldn't be around other people, being told that I was dangerous to be around. People were afraid of me to the point where I was afraid of myself. She also had systems of people that would report back to her if I broke any of these rules. I never was allowed privacy unless I was isolated. I think it's a combination of quite a few things. One, the church supports her. She's been promoted by the church, and people trust the church. Members trust their bishops, they trust their stake presidents, and a lot of these people, most people that are going to therapy, if not all, are in a vulnerable position. And she is remarkably convincing. She is also terrifying if you cross her, because she has and will systematically destroy your life. She destroys your reputation. She destroys any of your credibility. So even because there are definitely people that have been speaking out against her. I mean, she lost her license because of someone speaking out in 2012. Like, she's not just, everyone's not just been like, okay, yeah, for sure, fair game, free for all. People have been criticizing her. That's just that no one has listened. Because one, we have a culture of people not believing children and not trusting children. And also, children trust their parents. And she also separates people. She keeps people so they can't talk and corroborate. Like, it is so vile and tricky and ingenious.
As a survivor of parental alienation, I can understand why one angry, pathological parent would brainwash and manipulate their child to reject their other parent. I can understand this because I've lived through this. I believed the lies. I rejected my healthy, loving parent for 20 years. But I was struggling to understand why an outsider of the family would purposefully alienate spouses from each other. What drives this type of alienating behavior? What causes an outsider to gain pleasure from destroying marriages? I do believe that all alienators have somewhat of the same psychological profile, although the motives might differ. If you're not familiar with parental alienation, let me give you a 30-second rundown. For parental alienation, the motive of the pathological spouse is 1, to hurt their ex-partner, and 2, to isolate the child. In this classic case of parental alienation, the alienator is motivated by 2 things: anger and fear. Anger because they want to hurt the child's other parent by robbing them of their child's love, and fear. They're afraid of losing their child to the other parent. So they decide that they need to possess them and control them and isolate them instead. In the case of Jodi Hildebrandt, however, I don't really know if the classic motives necessarily apply. Surely she wasn't trying to hurt every spouse of every person she alienated. Is it possible that Jodi hates all men? Could it be that Jodi alienates women from their husbands because she finds pleasure in hurting any man? Which maybe symbolically represents to her all men? I don't know. Or could it be that Jodi develops romantic feelings for these women and she wants to isolate and control the women, these wives? Could the answer be both? As this case unfolds and we learn new information every day, I wonder what will come to the surface, what light can be shed on the psychopathology of a severe pathological alienator such as Jodi Hildebrandt. Oddly enough, another hallmark of alienation is the erasing of one's entire extended family. I think it's important to note that this element was present in the case of Ruby Franke. Upon meeting Jodi Hildebrandt, she actually cut out all 5 of her siblings and her parents from her life. As you heard in the men's testimonies, Jodi also used the behavior of making false accusations. False accusations are unsubstantiated and may be used to manipulate, in this case, the other spouse and legal authorities into hating the targeted person. There is actually something called spousal alienation, and I think this really applies here. Spousal alienation may include 6 elements. Character assassination. In this case, it would be Jodi Hildebrandt making derogatory remarks, spreading rumors, and portraying the other spouse in a negative light. 2, isolation. Jodi may have tried to isolate that one partner from family, friends, support networks, creating a sense of dependence and loneliness. 3, interference with communication. This can involve monitoring the spouse's communication devices, interfering with contact, intercepting messages, or limiting access to shared assets like bank accounts or shared property. 4, emotional manipulation. These tactics are employed to cause fear, guilt, and dependency in the other spouse. 5, false accusations. In this case, Jodi definitely did make unfounded accusations and allegations against the men in these marriages. And this is done to damage their reputation and their credibility. Finally, 6, refusal to co-parent. As this applies to Jodie, after she successfully turns the spouses against each other, she then goes on to allegedly manipulate the one spouse to alienate their children from their father, in this particular case. The concept of spousal alienation is not as widely studied or known as parental alienation, but it is certainly present here, in my opinion. I think what most of us can agree on is that this case makes one thing very clear about Jodi Hildebrandt, that she is an alienator. Like many alienators, Jodie possesses the uncanny ability to simultaneously fool the people she wants to fool while wreaking unmeasurable destruction on the lives of the most innocent behind closed doors, children. Let's not forget that there were so many warning signs, calls to CPS, a petition with nearly 18,000 signatures, a licensing committee putting Jodie on probation for 18 months, survivors detailing the abuse that Jodie inflicted on them, not to mention hundreds of hours of footage of Ruby Franke emotionally and psychologically abusing her children on YouTube for the whole world to watch. Alienation is not limited to parents and their children. Anyone can be a severe alienator. And more than anything, I hope that this video emphasizes the fact that abusive people are more capable of deranged evil than we want to imagine. Also, psychological abuse, like alienation, can and often does coexist with other types of abuse, such as sexual or physical in this case. Studies have shown that 95% of alienators have personality disorders. We know these are sick people. We know these are dangerous people. It is my hope that society will start to grasp just how dangerous pathological alienators can be. Although there are many elements in this case that led to the horror of August 30th, one element that I think that everyone has missed is the psychopathology of Jodi Hildebrandt. She is a severe, dangerous alienator. Alienation will wreck a child's life, and as you've seen in this testimonies, spousal alienation will wreck an adult's life as well. The damage caused by these severe alienators cannot be measured, cannot be qualified or quantified. It will spread for generations upon generations. It will trickle throughout society like a web. Cannot contain it. You will not be able to measure the damage that people like Jodi Hildebrandt have done. Ruby, like I said, I'm not excusing her at all. She needs to be in prison. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new about alienation. If you found it helpful or you'd like to watch more, please subscribe to my channel. I talk about all things related to parental alienation here on my channel. As a survivor of 20 years of parental alienation, I know how it can completely wreck a person's life. That's why I'm doing this. I hope people can start to take the psychological damage of parental alienation more seriously. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that people who will psychologically harm their children knowingly, without regard for their children's well-being, likely have it within them to harm their children in other ways. I believe that Jodi Hildebrandt is one of the most dangerous and insidious alienators that our modern society has seen. Enough is enough. I hope that the Frankie children can find some type of comfort and safety and love. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.